cabin. Today, it's all about the Suez Canal. Egypt was the first country to dig a waterway this long across its nation with one big goal: to boost world trade. It is, as of today, the shortest path from the eastern to the western world because of its special geographic location. And even if the idea first appeared 40 centuries ago, it was only quite recently that the project was finally completed. But why was it built? How was it influential to travel and trade? Why was there controversy around it? All these questions will be answered in this show. Let's have a look at the summary.
Take the history train a long way back to learn about the early stages of the canal and the many failed attempts to build it. In 1869, the canal was finally completed, but how, by who, and in what context? Get to know why this waterway is so important both to travel, trade and economy. About 60 years ago, the Suez crisis broke out. What was the situation all about? And why did the Suez Canal close again, 10 years later?
I have now made a timeline on the floor. I am standing in 2300 BC, right when the idea of building a canal in Egypt first started. Over at the opposite end is 2014. I will now start making my way forward to discover more about the early stages of the canal. Now, the original project wasn't quite as ambitious as the modern one. However, right about by 18,000 BC, the pharaoh of Egypt, Senusret III, and his men finished the construction of a canal linking the Mediterranean Sea to the Nile River and connecting it to the Red Sea via the Nile River's branches. The canal went back and forth between sitting to rot and being rehabilitated due to the Islamic invasion. Around 700 BC, another canal was planned by the pharaoh Necho II, going into the Erythraean Sea. This one was not completed until much later, during the Persian invasion of Darius in 522 BC. This one is said to have been extended to the Red Sea, much like the canal we have nowadays, by Ptolemy II, around 260 BC. However, it unfortunately ended up much like the previous ones, and even if many rulers tried to restore it, it was eventually abandoned in a state of disrepair. After that, nothing much was done to rebuild the canal for many years, so we have skipped a long part of the timeline. And we're going back here in the 1600s. Because it was in 1798, when Napoleon Bonaparte conquered Egypt, that the idea reflourished. This time more complex. Yes, Napoleon wanted to connect the Red Sea to the Mediterranean without passing through the Nile. His original idea behind this was actually to create a devastating trade problem for the British. However, problems in the difference of water levels soon appeared, and the project was suspended, then given up on completely. In 1833, a group of Frenchmen, les Saint-Siméon, came to Egypt with a great interest in the project. And this is the same group of people who, 20 years later, actually went on to construct the Suez Canal. To tell you all about how they did it, I have a special reporter who's ready to explain. Mika Bibi. The Suez Canal's completion in 1869 was definitely a cause for celebration. After having to stop their planning due to lack of interest from the Egyptian king and the sudden plague epidemic, les Saint-Simonians reunited in Paris and formed a group to study the possibility of a canal again in 1846. Lots of planning went into the project, and by 1854, the Egyptian viceroy Pasha Said was convinced. A couple of years later, the new Universal Company of the Maritime Suez Canal was formed with the authority to build a canal and operate it for 100 years. The financial estimate of the project was 200 million francs. After many problems, including financial issues and poorly compensated labour, the canal finally opened in 1869. So yes, joy and celebration reigned on opening day. Festivities included fireworks and a ball attended by 6,000 people, including several royals from all over the world. But why is the canal so important?
to today's world, and how has it influenced travel and trade? Let me explain.
The Suez Canal is of great significance worldwide, and for many reasons. First of all, it has greatly improved transit time for trade, and is considered a sort of passageway between the Western world and the Eastern world. Because, for example, if I came from India here, and I was going to Spain carrying goods, I would have, before the Suez Canal, I would have had to go all the way around Africa, like this. And that would have taken me 41 days, or 18,582 kilometers. But now, with the Suez Canal, I could travel through the Red Sea, up through the canal, through the Mediterranean, and get to my destination much faster, in 24 days, or 11,067 kilometers, which is a little more than half of the previous distance. However, this is not the only reason why the canal is important. It also supports 8% of the world's shipping traffic, with about 50 ships passing through it every day. But its significance can also be negative. It's considered a geographic choke point. This means that because of its narrow width, it can only support a certain number of ships, and therefore it could block the shipping traffic and cause a lag in world trade. A bit like on the motorway when there's a long queue for cars. But however, in the future, the Suez Canal Authority is planning to deepen and widen the canal to stop this issue. Today, the Suez Canal Company was nationalised by the Egyptian President Nasser. The British-French enterprise has run the waterway since its opening in 1869, so this event is sure to cause political tensions among the three nations. The Suez Crisis was really the peak. It was when the canal was at the front page of all the newspapers, and it was such a huge and unexpected event, very influential to world history. So with the nationalisation of the Suez Canal, the British and the French were outraged, despite Nasser offering them full compensation for the company. The US Eisenhower administration tried to make a settlement between the countries, but they all refused. Meanwhile, France and Britain were in talks with Israel, who were also affected by the situation, as Egypt would no longer let them pass through the canal. Israel then invaded the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, close to the Suez Canal. British and French forces arrived a couple of days later, claiming to be protecting Egypt from Israel. They suggested to take over the canal again to save Egypt from all the trouble, but Nasser refused. France and the UK eventually retracted themselves after receiving pressure from the US. This is a perfect example of how what happens in the Middle East affects the rest of the world immensely. Today, end of the Suez Crisis, this monumental conflict between France, Britain and Egypt has finally come to a stop.
The Suez Crisis may have been the climax of the Suez Canal story, but it wasn't the only time it underwent problems. Yes, 10 years later, in 1967, the canal closed again, this time for 7 years due to the Six-Day War when Israel occupied the Sinai Peninsula. This caused delays in delivery and trade, so many people were not happy, once again showing how significant the canal is. In 1975, after a treaty was signed between Egypt and Israel, the waterway reopened, much to the delight of traders who could once again get to their destination faster and more efficiently.
The Suez Canal has certainly gone through a lot. The project beginning in the Pharaoh's times and finally being completed in 1869 serves as a passageway between worlds and has greatly influenced trade and travel. The economies of several countries were affected by it, which is why Britain and France were so alarmed when the Suez Crisis broke out. And many traders and delivery ships encountered problems again when the canal closed for 7 years in the 60s. This is clearly a sign of how influential and important it has become, and no one could imagine what would happen if the canal were to close forever. I hope you enjoyed the show, and to see you soon for more on the Mika Channel. Bye!